Greetings, my name is John, aka Jab, and it is Saturday, January 19th, 2013, and this video is about the Realist Collective Philosophy. It is my personal philosophy. It is an actual collection of various philosophical ideas that are melded together with the goal of understanding the truth and what affects our understanding of the truth so that we can achieve our goals in a more meaningful and effective manner. Now, as a quick overview, because this video is likely going to be a little long, I'm going to talk about, well, I have a plate analogy, measuring possibilities, actual versus truth versus theory versus pre-argumentative, actual truth contrasting personal truth and opinion, perception, the five senses, limits of our senses, technology as an extension of those limits, objectivity versus idealism, keeping truth separate of opinion while still having your opinions, determinism and fatalism versus random and supernaturalism, fate, the technological pinnacle of all of existence, just a slight tidbit for the heck of it, and a lot of how religion or religious-like ideas actually kind of coexist in an existentialist existence. So, I will be talking a little about religion, but I'm not going to hose it down. So if you are religious and you really, really like your religion, then even if the truth does not include religion, it includes a lot of ideas that are in religion. So, now, the goal here is not to push any agenda. In fact, there are ways to determine agendas. So, the only agenda is to discover what is actually true. And there, from that point, you can determine what you would do with existence. So, the idea is that if you find that you are wrong about something, you correct yourself. You don't have an over-bloated ego where you think you know everything there is in existence, because if you did, you'd be, insane or something. So anyway, to help me with some of the things I will be talking about, I have my friend here, Frank, and Frank will be assisting us in some of the philosophical analogies that I'll be using. So, let's begin, shall we? So, when we talk about things, there is the plate analogy. So here's a plate. Aha. Now, if I suggest something does exist, I am making a positive claim. So, an example, if my microphone would stay on the desk here. When you make a positive or negative claim, if you make a positive claim, let's say I say Frank the potato exists. So I have put Frank the potato on this plate, and he might get seasick here, or airsick, or whatever. So I have made the positive claim that Frank the potato exists. Now, you might be talking about something a little bit more significant, like God, or the moon, or Wookiee spacemen. But for now, we're going to talk about Frank the potato. If you say something does not exist in a debate, then you are removing that object from the debate, with the plate being basically representing existence. So if you make a positive claim, you're putting this object in existence in the debate, and if you make a negative claim, you are removing the object from existence in the debate. Thank you, Frank. So, let's go back to my notes that you can't see because only I'm on the screen. philosophical realist does not hold beliefs. So there are philosophical realist manages possibilities, measures possibilities, not manages. So there are, generally speaking, four ways that I classify something, as far as if I determine something like Frank the Potato exists or not. So we can classify something as actual, as truth, as theory, or as pre-argumentative. Now, we could say, well, Frank the Potato actually exists in some form or fashion. Or that we hold it true that Frank the Potato exists. Or that we might have a theory that we have strongly suggestive evidence that Frank the Potato exists. Or the weakest possibility, a pre-argumentative. Now, a pre-argumentative is defined as any debate which no person or party can provide evidence to push an explanation into the classification of a theory. It is defined on my website, which is down there, endorsed by Frank the Potato. So, as a philosophical realist, I don't hold beliefs, because a belief is something that it's like saying, well, I believe Frank the Potato exists, but I'm not really going to challenge it because I'm too lazy to think about it, or I'm just too busy, or I don't care that much. So I'm going to put that belief over there in a corner and just kind of not deal with it. Or also, I mean, there's various ways you could say, for example, you don't believe that your belief should or could be challenged, an example. Well, in philosophical realism, you generally want to classify something on how strongly you think a probability is. Now, before we go, without debating things right now, I want to get more into how we use our mind to understand it's not only the outside, the existence around us, but also ourselves. And no, we're not talking like mushy feelings and stuff. So, how do we determine if something is actually true instead of our personal truth? Okay? So, we have perception. It's my favorite trait. They don't have it in video games, but they should. And we have, generally speaking, five senses. We have sight, smell, taste, feeling, hearing. And technology is the artificial way to extend the limits. So like an example in astronomy, we use the Hubble telescope as a technological instrument to detect visually, in a sense, light emanating from galaxies on the farthest reaches of the universe, from billions of light years away or something like that, billions of years ago, space and time and all that good jazz. So it's important to understand the limits of our perceptions and understand how our perception is flawed. That existence, while absolute and perfect in a sense, not perfect as in your personal opinion of how you would define perfect, but perfect in that it's not going to suddenly blue screen and say, please hit the reset button, existence has suddenly crashed. So existence and everything in existence is absolute. It's our perception and understanding that is relative. And therefore, when I use the word progressive, I don't mean it in the political sense. I'm not going to get into politics in this video. But when I say progressive, I mean actually progressive. Like making progress and expanding the core of our knowledge and wisdom. And so it's important to refine how we approach something. Because yes, it's perfectly okay to have opinions. Um, you know, some people might like Frank the Potato. Some people might like deem Frank the Potato a hazard to humanity. So it's important to keep what you hold as varying levels of possibilities separate from your opinion. So again, it's okay to have an opinion regardless of how much your opinion may or may not align with truth. So an example, you might have um, you might conjure up political thoughts, and these political thoughts, based off the realist collective philosophy, might state one thing, but you would end up disagreeing with it. But if science and philosophy determines that this is the correct stance on something such as politics or just a philosophical idea in general, and you find that your opinion is outside of it, well, then again, you could classify it as a belief and put it over there and not deal with it. Or you could figure out, well, we're imperfect beings. Generally speaking, we're going to be more wrong about things than we are right. But generally speaking, people that we generally like are generally going to speak about things that they are fairly certain that is actual truth or a very strong theory, and how they speak of these things. And generally speaking, we're not in everyday life. You're not going to hear so much about pre-argumentatives or even theories. You're going to hear what people deem to be truth. Whereas people we generally don't have high opinions of are generally going to be talking in what we would classify what they're saying as theories or pre-argumentatives or just outright lies or falsifications or however you want to deem them. Okay. So anyway, objectivity versus idealism. Now, ideals are fine as opinions, but existence is physical. And yes, while the mind itself and even energy in a sense is a physical object, we have to be objective about that. Keeping in mind our opinions can be separate and different from what is real, which is fine, depending on the context of what you're talking about, of course. And so, being objective is how we determine when we acquire new knowledge and wisdom. We say, well, can I manipulate it in a way just for me personally, or when you're if you're a philosophical realist, understanding it and understanding what it is separate of yourself, and then after you understand it, applying how it may or may not interact or apply to you on a personal level. So it's very important to look at things like if you were Frank the Potato, look at yourself separate of yourself and understand how you might be wrong and how self-correction, which is one of the most important things, and again, that clashes with a lot of people's egos. I'm not wrong, there's no way I could be wrong. Well, it's okay to be wrong. What's not okay is to hold on to being wrong when people have figured out that you're wrong. Okay? So that's what objectivity is saying, well, I'm not correct on this. I'm going to correct myself, because if you correct yourself when you are wrong about something, then you're going to have a different perspective. Going back to perception. And when you have a different perspective, you're going to be able to approach a scenario such as, for example, let's say your opinion about wealth. And you have the opinion and truth. And your opinion about your personal wealth is that it is... Let's say that your opinion about your personal wealth is underwhelming. And so your goal would be to accrue greater amounts of wealth. And so, to be objective, if you're approaching acquiring more wealth is not working out, then self-correction and being objective will hopefully change your perspective and allow you to determine a better approach and therefore actions to take to acquire wealth in a more reliable fashion. Now, good and evil are intentions. Good and evil, you can't say Frank the potato is evil. Okay? Evil Frank the potato. Why? Well, Frank the potato doesn't have a brain. Sorry, Frank, but Frank the potato doesn't have a brain. So, because Frank the potato does not have the ability to make judgments or perceive existence in any meaningful way, Frank the potato can't have a goal or an agenda, etc. And without that intention, there is no good or evil. So Frank the potato cannot necessarily or inherently be good or evil. Now, if someone took Frank the potato and gave it to someone else to eat because that person was hungry, that intention would be good. Except for Frank the potato might not like that intention. Whereas if someone took Frank the potato and threw them at someone to cause them harm, that intention would be evil. So good and evil cannot be defined as physical objects, but merely as how we define the intentions of actions or words. So now we're going to start going away from the self and out into the outer existence, alright? And define, how do we define existence and how it works in a more philosophical understanding. So there's determinism and fatalism versus random and supernatural, alright? Now science is our way of saying what is. Philosophy is the way of saying why is it. And so if you look at our scientific understanding of existence, okay, because science and physics and all that good stuff, like for example the technology for your computer that you're using to watch this video right now, that was science was used to determine how to get the materials at one point, and then someone said, hey, we can use these materials and do this, and then eventually people determined using scientific methods how to shrink the computer, and by shrinking the computer parts they were able to make the computer fast enough and eventually the computer became fast enough where it could do increasingly powerful things, and eventually we were able to do things like record and share videos. Good stuff. So science is how, philosophy is why. How does this, what exists, how does it apply in a way that makes sense or is meaningful to me? And so when we look at existence and our scientific understanding, science is this ever-expanding sphere, our core sphere of our understanding of what is. Now, if you take a circle, alright, and you've ever seen a picture of the innards of a planet or other large object, you're generally speaking going to have a core, a mantle, and then the crust on the outer edges. I don't really want to use the word crust. Let's say the outer edge of an object. You can define the core of knowledge and wisdom as that which is being immediately around you, like Frank the potato. You could define the outer edges of our knowledge and wisdom as being defined as the laws of existence. So that would be the static truth of existence. Static truth being that is not the content, but the laws of how existence works. Whereas the dynamic truth of existence is basically the content, anything that physically exists. And all things are ultimately physical. Even energy is ultimately physical, because matter and energy are just the same thing, just in different forms. Now, with science, we have determined that things are increasingly predictable. Now, yes, we do end up asking a lot more questions, but we do get a lot of answers through science. And it's important that, naturally speaking, people ask questions. It is unhealthy for a human being to not ask the question why. But in a healthy psychological setting for a human being, the question why is this burning question of understanding what is, why. The philosophical desire to understand it, even if someone doesn't view it in a philosophical light, so to speak. The real meat of knowledge and wisdom is the mantle. Why is that? Well, an example, you might have a brown dwarf. What is a brown dwarf? Well, what is a star? Well, it's basically you have a planet, and eventually you will have something that grows in size. If you keep adding mass to it, it will be like a gas giant. And eventually, gas giant will get so large, because most physical matter, not antimatter and other dark energy and dark matter and whatnot, but most matter, it tends to be lighter elements. And so, if you have large planets, they typically tend to be gas giants from our current understanding. And eventually, the amount of gravity from all this mass starts to create heat, and you eventually have larger objects that we call brown dwarfs. And then, if you have enough mass for thermonuclear fission, which is where you take, not you, but where naturally occurring atoms smash into each other to create heavier atoms, that's what a star is defined as. And eventually you have stars that get so massive that their surface is beyond the orbit of Saturn. So you can imagine all those years it takes for, spacecraft to go out there, like we have the New Horizons spacecraft that's out there that'll eventually reach Pluto. And you imagine that that was launched in 2013, and it won't arrive, no, 2003, I think. It's 2013. No, it was launched on January 19th, 2006, and flying at a Earth relative velocity of 16.26 kilometers per second, or 36,000 miles per hour. It won't arrive to Pluto until roughly it is currently will arrive roughly July 14th, 2015. So that gives you an idea of just how massive things can get, and things can get pretty small as well. And through all this scientific technology that we use to learn these things, we can determine that they are patterns to existence. The general pattern is being that determinism and fatalism are increasingly true. Now, the only way that existence is not deterministic is if black holes destroy information. I'll explain this momentarily. Determinism is defined as the philosophical doctrine holding that all events are inevitable consequences of antecedent sufficient cause, or in layman's terms, action-reaction. Now, random does not exist, because if random existed, random would randomly perpetuate itself and deteriorate systems. Now, a system is defined as a form of established organization. A transit system, a respiratory system, a computer system, solar system. Now, organization does not necessarily infer intelligence. I mean, there are other solar systems out there, so to speak, planetary star systems, but no one created them. They just naturally occurred. So, since random would randomly perpetuate itself, systems could not exist. They would deteriorate, and therefore existence would be incomprehensible and we wouldn't be there to comprehend it because we're part of systems. Everything, even the human, the human body, how we came to exist, however you want to debate that, etc. Those are all systems. Those are all forms of organization. They don't. There's no. There's no mental intention. That's just the phenomena of existence. So that's science looking at the phenomena and us trying to understand it, removing some absolute need for there to be a human and a human or deity-like intention for existence. Now, the realist philosophy is not necessarily hostile to religion or theological belief, because the goal is to understand existence as it really is. What's important to understand is that the realist philosophy does not favor something unless it is strongly suggested to be actual, that it really is. And it's important to remember that you're not being a philosophical realist if you're not being objective, if you're not questioning what is on the plate. So whether it is Frank the Potato or God, if you cannot objectively question something that is put on into a debate, then you're not a philosophical realist. Period. So to put in other words, if a deity or multiple deities exist, then philosophical realism will eventually determine if it's true or not. Based on, eventually we'll have the technology and the means to better define existence and our understanding of it and the perception that will come with that greater understanding of existence and its nature and composition. So, random does not exist. And there are two ways to define random. There are two terms to define random, which I typed in incorrectly here. There is true random, which is supernaturalism, and because existence is only natural, supernaturalism cannot exist, and therefore random cannot exist. False random is the human inability to predict. So, for example, if you and I were standing on a hilltop in a very dark place where we could see all the stars crystal clear, and we saw a random shooting star or random comet go by in only a matter of seconds, we might say, "Oh, there's a random shooting star or comet." Now, offhand, in a very casual fashion, to us it's random because we don't know its origins. We don't know what it is. It's competition offhand. We don't know if it's going to come back. We don't know if someone sent it or if it just so happened to be there because of natural phenomena, etc. So to us it's random, but in existence is nothing random about it. And if you have the time, resources, and the desire to use that technology and resources to determine everything that you could ask about that shooting star or comet, then you could determine all those things that you would have otherwise have referred to as it being random. So everything can be known. Now, how far can we take the idea that everything can be known? I think a lot of religious people will actually find this very entertaining. Now, the subjective part that we know of at this time in existence with our current scientific understanding is that black holes are the only thing, to our current understanding, that might potentially destroy knowledge and wisdom. So, or information. So when something goes into a black hole, are we able to reverse calculate what it was before it went into a black hole? That's the subjective part, which at this time we don't have we haven't had the scientific advancement yet. And provided that humanity continues to progress, and I use the actual word progress, not the politicalized version of it, eventually that will be something we will likely be able to determine. But if we go with the strong, strongly suggestive patterns that there's nothing random in existence, then we can determine that fate is how existence is defined. So fate, how do we define fate? Well, fate is defined as an inevitable course and destination predetermined by nature. Destination being or circumstance or whatnot. So you can't avoid fate, but you can potentially understand it. And the fact that you're watching this video, an example, is part of fate. If you're gonna, scratch your ear or you're eating something, even the most minute ideas or thoughts that you might think are meaningless, even that is part of fate. So everything at the smallest, most absolutely small detail, that is all predetermined. Everything is predetermined. So I'll give you an example. If you took a cube and you put existence in that cube, okay, doesn't matter how vast existence, it could be a multiverse. A multiverse could be absolutely insignificant. It could be a quark inside of an atom in another universe, all right? However vast existence could be, if you could define it and put it inside of a cube, just so you could define existence as something that you could hold in your hand for the sake of keeping something simple. And then you had an infinite number of these cubes. And the contents of existence were absolutely, without any possible conceivable way, have any differences. And you had a play and pause button. And you could play or fast forward. And you could determine, you go as far into time as you want. And you could have all these cubes at the same time play and pause or fast forward. And you went as mind-bogglingly far into the future as you want. Quintillions, quadrillions, decillions of years. Doesn't matter how far you went into the future. And so long as all these cubes have all the exact same contents, then if you paused and you compared, you paused all these infinite numbers of existences inside of these cubes, and you looked at and you compared, just imagine as for the sake of simplicity, a frame of time, a picture, and you looked at all these pictures of all these infinite number of instances of existence, they would all be exactly the same. Why? Because that is the nature of existence. Existence can only be the way existence is. Existence, the fabric of existence, however you would define it, it's not going to suddenly blue screen and say, your existence has suddenly stopped working. Please ask Frank the Potato to hit the reset button. Existence, in a sense, is perfect. It cannot, you can't have a paradox. You can't suddenly just have something random happen. So everything can potentially be known. So what does that say about us? I mean, it's a really fascinating idea, but what does that say about us? What does that say about where we, as sentient beings, what is our ultimate path? And that's part of one of my science fictional universes I've worked on, is about the technological pinnacle of what can ultimately be achieved. And that technological pinnacle would be to take in a sense, keep in mind that, we don't even have interstellar travel at this point. Well, we might and not be aware of it, etc. But in a very vaguely defined fashion, the ultimate pinnacle of technology would be to take a snapshot of existence, where at one frame in time. We understand everything. We understand without any vagueness. There is no human randomness. There is everything. We can define the properties and the content and the interactions of everything. And so the sense of random has completely evaporated. That everything is known or can be known. And just a simple action of going to whatever part, time, and physical place in existence to look at it and understand it. But you could look at it and understand it for however deep into details that you wanted to get into. And so, at one point, possibly, sentient life could achieve technology that would take a single snapshot of existence and then with vast computational power slowly calculate existence as a whole, which would be the most mind-numbing math problem ever. And if you think you hate math, imagine the beings that would work on these equations that would have to perfectly emulate how existence itself works and all the vastness in it. And if anything was questionable, that this calculative formula, mind-bogglingly complex, where it might be like the number 42, we don't know, okay? Frank might know, but he's not saying anything. So, that these beings, whether they end up being are like really far off offspring, or if it doesn't happen, or if it has happened, or whatever, will eventually be able to determine everything that has ever happened, frame by frame by frame. And so everything you have thought, everything you have done, everything that has ever happened, however miscellaneous, however far into the vast reaches of space, to take existence and put it into a box, and then take that box and compare it to the size of our known existence, and then say that far out into space, etc., into a multiverse, into taking a multiverse, which would be like multiple universes where they blow up and expand because they ever expand outwards, that you would have big collapses and eventually big bangs from where those sides of universes collapse into, partially into each other, and eventually collapse. And then you would zoom out of that, and then you'd have whatever, you would have the structure of existence, and even that might be the size of a quark inside of an atom, inside of another, zooming out, so to speak. So however unfathomable, ineffably massive existence is, it is ultimately finite. It is not infinite. The idea of infinity, again, is a human concept, but it is ultimately finite. It can be defined. It can be known. That is the ultimate technological challenge. That is the ultimate math question. That is the ultimate physics experiment, is to calculate everything that has ever happened. Now, it might be possible, it is very likely possible, that one could calculate relative parts of existence. We already do this on very, very small, minute scales. You have intelligence agencies, for example. That's what they do, but on a much, much more small scale. To them, it might be massive, or at least to an everyday, average, ordinary person, it might be massive to them, and they're like, haha, this is easy stuff. But it's still a relative way of looking at existence and determining, and that's your perspective. That's where you're looking at, what you're paying attention to. When you look at something, whether you're simply looking at it or if you're seeing it. Now, there are some interesting religious parallels, I suppose you could put it, where if religious belief of heaven and hell don't exist, well, who's to say that someone might not, and or has already, and that we are already part of some emulated heaven or hell, okay? And that someone could recreate existence or re-emulate existence. Okay, we might be existence inside of a bubble of another existence, etc. Or that these sentient beings with such massive technological achievements could actually recreate the existence. They could maybe possibly take the very molecules and all the way down to the most fundamental particles and actually find those original particles and put you back together and then say, I didn't like what you did last Thursday, and neither did Frank the Potato. Who knows? But according to determinism and fatalism, it might be possible. It's likely possible. And that is inferred by what we already do know. And so, damn. So, generally speaking, the realist philosophical collective philosophy is not a single idea, it's a collective of multiple ideas and understanding their opposite or polar idea. For example, objectivity versus idealism. And yes, for example, you could have multiple tiers, so objectivity versus subjectivity. Opinion versus truth, or opinion contrasting truth. So it's not necessarily opposing ideas, but how ideas relative to other ideas. They might be, perpendicular, truth and opinion, because your opinion about one truth may be, conductive and parallel to that. Or your opinion of another truth, you might not like. For an example, we don't like that animals feel pain when other animals eat them. It's undesirable. We don't like that. But that's how existence works. Okay, so generally speaking, we don't like or have a high opinion or desirable opinion of that, but that truth is, we've determined that it is overwhelmingly true. And so, the things that matter to us, that matter on a personal level, those are the things that we hold to be most true. Be it religion, or politics, or other interests like astronomy, computers, potatoes named Frank, etc. That is what philosophy is about, is the love of knowledge and wisdom. And the realist collective philosophy is about understanding truth as it really is, and the potential and of existence and the existence around us, and understanding how it applies to us after we've thought about it separate of ourselves, and then we apply ourselves to it. And by understanding existence, by taking ourselves out of the equation and looking at the equation from a third-party perspective, and increasing our ability to determine things truthfully, and shedding that ego where we're saying, well, I'm not wrong, you're wrong. You're wrong about something somewhere somehow. We're all wrong about something somewhere somehow. Fine. It's all about correcting yourself. And correcting yourself in a way in what does matter. So, for example, most people aren't going to be talking about Frank the Potato in their day-to-day lives, they're going to be talking about their finances, the people they love, their friends, the economy, um, that weird hip hobo on their front lawn, etc. They're going to be talking about things that matter to them. And so, having and understanding your perception and how it can be manipulated, how people can come up with agendas, how things can be used to manipulate you, be it for good or negative, and understanding how that will change your opinion and how that will change your understanding of what you think to be true. Though that is very, very important. That is, to put it in this perspective, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Voltaire. And the goal, life, the meaning of life, the purpose of life, what is the meaning of life? Well, unless we determine that, like Frank the Potato, that religion is true, that existence is inherently existential. Because when you say something exists, you're making a positive claim. You're putting it there. You're saying this does exist. But if you don't have a reasonable amount of evidence at which that can at least be partially agreed with by someone who has a differing opinion or understanding or stance, etc., then that's nothing greater than essentially a pre-argumentative or belief. And as humans, we all have goals. We are all part of structures and systems. And part of that system is our personal morals and ethics, and how we as a society interact with other people. An example, a lot of atheists tend to end up being liberals. And they think, an example, that, oh, well, if religion's not true, then I can just throw the whole morality thing out the window and do whatever I please. Which is about the biggest pile of BS I've ever have seen out of anything. And so morals and ethics can be defined and are defined not through religion or throwing religion out if you're not religious, and therefore somehow inherently throwing out morals and ethics, but determined by our interactions with each other. And so with religion or without religion, these morals, these standards that we hold ourselves to, some higher than others, but the higher the better. And this is how we determine meaning in our lives. So if existence is existential, and there's no inherent meaning to existence, then the meaning of life is simply that which with you have given it. So what is the purpose of life? If the more we learn of what is through science, and therefore why it is through philosophy, then the purpose of life is simply attaining greater amounts of knowledge and wisdom. Apply that to yourself in whatever way you feel is most applicable. So if you work in the medical field, or if you work in astronomy, or if you work with animals, or as a therapist or psychologist, doctor, a taxi driver, etc. Doesn't matter. You could be a fellow gamer playing video games, and you like to talk about politics on occasion, etc. The structure is best understood when questioning things, and it is important to question things. When you question something, you're not necessarily throwing something out the window. If we question that Frank the Potato, or something much more meaningful, like to some people God, exist, you're not necessarily throwing it out the window by asking, does whatever I'm questioning exist or not? You're giving it meaning. You're giving it value by saying it's worth talking about, it's worth debating. In the words of Walt Disney, our heritage and ideals, our code and standards, the things we live by and teach our children, are preserved or diminished by how freely we exchange ideas and feelings. That's the truth. And understanding the truth objectively, in a fashion, regardless of whether your opinion agrees with it, is one of the most important cornerstones of philosophical realism. So when we take a topic, any topic, let's say an example, gay marriage, right? How would a philosophical realist approach a politically polarized topic like this? Well, we could go hours and hours over a lot of relevant and very, well, suppose relevant information about why things happen in existence. But how do we define life? How do we define sex and the role of sex and etc.? All right. Well, life, the ultimate goal of all life forms, is to not die. Simple as that. But the problem that most life forms have, in general, is that we all eventually die. It really puts a damper on the weekend. And so, in order to not die in a sense, we reproduce. So the second ultimate goal of all life forms, healthy life forms, is to reproduce. Anyone that has an agenda hostile to your number one goal of living generally has an agenda to either rule you, the lands that you occupy, etc. War. We all know what war is about. It's control. And so when we look at a topic like homosexuality, gay marriage, and etc., we look at, well, why does sex exist? Okay? Well, sex exists for reproduction. And then you're going to have people who have an agenda. Now, you have goals and agendas. Agenda is when someone is doing something that is not within the good graces of other people. They're forcing, usually in a subtle fashion, without you hoping to notice that you are trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Disempower another person for their own personal gain. So an example, if we were to ask, what is the correct philosophical stance on gay marriage? Well, why do people marry? Well, people marry in regards to staying together in a monogamous relationship to raise children. Because why? What's the second most important goal for all living life forms? Is to reproduce. Now, yes, someone who has an agenda, they could say, you don't have to reproduce because I want less of people who oppose my political agendas, is what that translates into, naturally speaking. And some people can be convinced that they should not reproduce. And then there are people that most of us would agree probably shouldn't be reproducing. Which begs to ask, stupid people, why aren't they falling into holes? This needs to happen. But anyway, so, but then we're talking about, if we're talking about gay marriage, we're talking about something like rights. So a philosophical realist would ask, how do we define what is a right and what is simply a demand that has nothing inherent to a right. So going off of a quick, rough definition off of Wikipedia, how do you define rights? As legal, social, or ethical principles of freedom or entitlement. Okay. So why would someone want to be entitled to marriage? Well, marriage is a way of saying, hey, if you married Frank the Potato, hands off. Frank the Potato and you are in love, and you have children with Frank the Potato. Okay, I know that's kind of weird because it's a potato, but I didn't want to use a real person for an example. And so, when we raise children, we want to make sure that we raise them so that they have our good morals and values, or what we think are good morals and values. Of course, it's relative. And so, that's maintaining your heritage, your culture, your identity. And through your children, in a sense, you perpetuate yourself, because eventually we all die. And so to perpetuate our existence, we reproduce, going back to the fundamental reason why we reproduce. And not all reproduction is sexual. Some reproduction could be where life forms just split in half and they go on their own merry way. Alright? So when we look at how we define a right, is homosexual marriage a right? Is it an entitlement? Well, two people of the same, why are there genders? Alright? And there's actually a good video about this, where you have two genders because the species was having difficulty surviving, but when it had a second gender to fulfill a different role, well, there's different biological roles of males and females. Males tend to be, not in all species, but tend to be larger. And naturally speaking, males, generally speaking, tend, not in all species, but a lot, tend to be able to go out and gather. So if you look at, generally speaking, humans, males tend to be the gatherers, and women tend, not always, but tend to be the caregivers at home to the offspring. This is generally speaking. Of course, we could go on to social politics and whatnot, but the goal is to keep this reasonably concise. So, that is why we have, genders going back so far, however many generations or species going back and, down that evolutionary tree, is because having two genders is evolutionarily advantageous. Just like anything else that we have, traits as what defines us as a human being. And so, when we think of something like jealousy, when you see someone with someone else who is engaging in acts that you would not like with someone you are married to, that is your way of saying there is a very highly defined correlation and relationship between these two people. And so, why does that relationship exist? Because of ultimately the impulse to recreate life. That is the natural impulse that we all have. And so we protect that because when we look at non-traditional forms of relationships, so if you have someone who has multiple partners or does not stay with multiple partners, there's a lot of negative associations with things, such as diseases. Diseases are generally not conducive to health, and poor health is not conducive to reproducing, and that is not conducive to the end goal of survival. Period. And because humans don't reproduce because we produce sexually and we require two separate genders, this is how it is inherently defined. You don't need religion for this. You don't need people thousands of years ago knew what was right and wrong. They might not have scientific explanation. They might not have had something physical that they can explain, and then the philosophy to explain it. But they still knew. And they put it into their religion. Fine. So why then do homosexuals exist if that is not what is part of nature? And some people say, oh, they exist naturally. We got to remember there are people out there who have agendas. And there are people, and a lot of those people have agendas to benefit at another person's loss. And that's where we go back to defining good and evil. What leads to this? So this is just one example of of many topics that can be discussed with philosophy, objectively speaking. Now, are we going to say, if we look at someone who's a homosexual, like Frank the homosexual potato, alright, do we hate Frank in general? No, Frank might be the most awesome potato ever, okay? So, it is possible, in an example, like you might like most of the colored pencils, but you're not a big fan of orange. You just don't like the color orange, but you like purple and black and blue and white and gray and red, but you're not a fan of orange. Fine. So it is possible, an example, to not like the traits of some people and understand why. But why do we not like that trait? Because we understand. Now, through this philosophy, we understand that that person has been taken advantage of. That person has been put at a disadvantage. And when we're talking about something like a sexual disorder, that's pretty deep. That's something that's very, very difficult, if not outright impossible. Maybe subjective to the individual, etc. Where we know that it's going to be very difficult to help that person. Or it might not. We don't know. But we know that something's wrong. And by having the philosophical understanding, we can understand what led to that being wrong. We can understand why that social injustice happened. So, when we look at that topic, homosexual marriage, gay marriage, however you want to refer to it as, it's not that people are entitled to rights, because homosexuals do not naturally exist. They exist because they were at one point a normal human being who has been afflicted by forces and agents are not necessarily a human being, but can be substances or anything. An agent is defined as a force or substance that causes change. Simple as that. Break it down to its basics. And that agent or agents, whether they're people or substances or psychological rewiring through media, etc., and telling people that feelings are more important than other things, and confusing people when they're at a young age, etc., those are agenda. And to find out an agenda, if someone has an agenda, all you have to determine is if they don't like that you exist or that you may have a family. And that if the people that they disagree with and what they do naturally is outside of their interest. And if their interest is to, an example, take money from you because you're doing foolish actions that are not natural and are outside of your best interest. Well, if you're doing what is outside of your best interest, you're likely going to spend money on things that aren't truly beneficial to you. And therefore, someone who has evil intentions to defraud you will have an agenda. Anyway, this video is 1 hour and 5 minutes long, so I think I will leave it at that. I can't go through. I suppose I have a very rough structure for the philosophy. There are a lot of other terms. There are a lot of other definitions that I could have gone over, a lot of other analogies, such as an axiom, A-X-I-O-M, which is a statement that is so true by definition, is so obviously true that it need not be proved, and thus may be used without further debate as a starting point. So if you go to my website, down here, in the video, wherever, I can't point because the camera's reversed or whatever, and you go to the philosophy section, there's lots of definitions. I have not really updated it in a while because it's very difficult to structure and keep it updated in a sense, so I try to put emphasis on the definitions and the terms pages. And feel free to add your thoughts, and anything agenda laden will be removed. Comments are approved. They don't show up until I personally approve them. So, and if you swear in your comments, even if I agree with you to the entire face of the planet, if you swear, I will still remove your comment. So, there are little kids on here. Let's have a little etiquette, please. So, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to hearing what you folks think. See you around.